Imagine boarding what should be a routine international flight and finding yourself, hours later, landing on an old aircraft carrier in the middle of nowhere. This is the gripping true story of a Boeing 747 crew forced to attempt the unimaginable, an emergency landing on a mysterious, isolated aircraft carrier lost in the endless ocean. No runway, no support, just a relentless storm and dwindling fuel. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event that quickly spirals into a dark, tense struggle for survival as two veteran pilots, Harry and Walter, find themselves face-to-face with an eerie crew and a long-buried, chilling secret. This isn't your typical landing story, but just as they think they've made it, they realize this journey is far from over. They had to think fast and make sure the plane was lined up perfectly with the runway, the speed was just right, the wind speed and direction was taken into consideration, and that they had enough fuel. This was a nerve-wracking experience, but it was nothing compared to what else was happening on that ship. Harry and Walter couldn't believe what they saw once they patrolled the ship. Wasn't this a ship governed by the National Air Force? How could there be no control over what was happening on this ship? No laws whatsoever. Harry and Walter didn't have to look twice to understand the deep trouble they were in now. One thing was for certain. The darkest secrets are kept in the ocean, far away from the daily lives of millions. Something like this could only remain secret by isolation from the rest of the world. And now that the pilots and the passengers accidentally arrived there, this isolation was under a threat, leading to pure chaos. There was no other option than to escape, not just to save the passengers, but also because the world needed to hear about this dark place. Harry and Walter knew they had to leave, even with a broken plane if needed. But what was kept from the world on this mysterious ship? Why were the pilots so frightened, and why were they so eager to leave after finding out the truth? Harry, an experienced pilot, was taking his last flight before a well-earned vacation. But tragedy struck. On a flight from Melbourne to Los Angeles, while he was flying over the Atlantic Ocean, Harry noticed the power of one of his wings rapidly going down. There was trouble ahead, much more than he could have possibly known. Harry manages to remain calm, as he's trained to deal with situations like this. However, he realizes that the wing might not be fixable while they're still in the air and starts to worry. The passengers seem to notice the damaged wing as well and start to grow restless. Then, Harry sees something in the distance. It's the aircraft carrier, looking like a safe landing spot. Well, looks can be deceiving. The first signs of something being off about this aircraft carrier don't take long to show themselves. Harry's co-pilot Walter, who barely survived the upcoming adventure, tries to make contact with the ship but doesn't get a response at all. The pilots realize they really have to land by now. If it wasn't possible to land with permission, then there was no other option than to land without it. After all, the nearest airport was hundreds of miles away. They had no other option than to land on the aircraft carrier. Harry starts landing the plane, which takes all the skills he has. He feels the pressure of getting the passengers unharmed on safe grounds, but realizes he has to take some risks and land at high speed. It was going to be a rough landing, and the crew of the aircraft carrier wouldn't like this. Well, not liking it was an understatement. Harry and Walter managed to safely land the plane, but not without struggle. They check on the passengers. Even though they seem to feel anxious, all of them are unharmed. Harry is relieved but can't enjoy the successful landing. He has to look for the crew of the aircraft carrier. Harry and Walter head toward the cabin of the aircraft carrier after handing over the command of the passenger to the stewardesses. It's quite a distance. And, as they get closer to the cabin, they see multiple jet fighters covered in dust and barely taken care of. What could be the meaning of this? They reach the cabin. Something strange catches their eye. Even though it's broad daylight, the curtains are closed. Walter knocks on the door but gets no reaction. He steps back for Harry to try as well. Harry knocks on the door and says hello, but receives no answer as well. The pilots are about to leave when something happens. Harry and Walter hear a hoarse voice saying, "Who's there? Don't you know not to wake me at this hour?" Harry steps forward and follows according to the given protocol. He tells the captain his name, the number of their Boeing, the airline, and the reason for their emergency landing. Then they hear the captain laugh from inside his cabin. The horse laugh seems to be a bit contagious. Harry and Walter can't help but feel a little uneasy and just laugh along. They look at each other in disbelief and decide just to play along when the captain starts to laugh even louder. Then he stops to say something to Harry and Walter. "I advise you to fix that precious piece of metal of yours and fly off. Don't let me catch you when I really wake up." Harry and Walter don't know what they're hearing. Where did this come from? They walk off and decide to return to the plane in order to reach the control room. They shouldn't have done that. They enter the cockpit and try to make contact with the control room right away. For some reason, the regular connection doesn't seem to be working. Luckily, there still is an emergency line. Walter tries it, and after a while, they hear a voice on the other side of the line. However, it wasn't the voice they were hoping to hear. It was the hoarse voice of the captain. He hijacked their connection and stopped the two pilots from reaching out to the control room. Things started to get heated now as they were truly dependent on the captain from here on. Harry breaks out in a sweat. The captain's chilling words to "stay put until the sun goes under" left Harry and Walter feeling a gnawing unease. Dinner guests? They exchanged worried glances, realizing they were at the mercy of this strange captain, who held their food, water, and any hope of safety in his hands. They knew they had little choice but to comply, at least for now. As the hours passed, tension rippled through the cramped quarters of the 747. The passengers grew increasingly restless, with murmurs of fear and anger spreading like wildfire. Every glance through the windows showed only the unending stretch of ocean and the foreboding shadow of the aircraft carrier beneath them. The crew members, too, were weary, barely able to mask their own fear as they tried to calm the worried passengers. They came to Harry and Walter, pleading for answers, but the pilots themselves had none. They could only offer empty reassurances, knowing full well they were powerless in this bizarre scenario. Then, one passenger, a stern middle-aged man with a steady gaze, had enough. Fed up, he pushed his way into the cockpit demanding food and water with a tone of rising frustration. "If you can't get it for us, I'll go find it myself," he declared sarcastically. Before Harry and Walter could fully react, the man stormed off the plane, determined to explore the ship on his own. They tried to stop him, shouting after him, but the man's resolute figure disappeared into the shadowy depths of the carrier. Later, when they thought back on it, Harry and Walter would remember that moment with a shiver. This was the last time anyone ever saw him. As night finally fell, casting the ship into shadows and adding an air of menace to its already grim surroundings, Harry and Walter braced themselves for their next move. "I didn't sign up for this," Walter muttered nervously, his usual composure shaken by the growing dread that had taken hold of him. But as they would soon learn, Walter's courage would be tested far beyond his imagination before this night was over. Approaching the captain's cabin, they knocked tentatively. A faint, raspy voice answered, and when the door creaked open, they were met with a sight that both unsettled and intrigued them. The captain, a frail, weathered figure, looked as if he had been living in exile for years, his clothes tattered and his eyes bloodshot. The stench of alcohol filled the small room. "Apologies for earlier," he slurred, a crooked grin crossing his face. He invited them in, and as they exchanged uneasy looks, they realized they had no choice but to accept. With a smirk, the captain gestured for them to follow him deeper into the ship, mumbling, "Let me give you a little tour of my kingdom." The pilots reluctantly followed him through narrow corridors and steep metal staircases that led them into the lower decks. The further they went, the darker and more decrepit their surroundings became, with the faint smell of mold and rust seeping from every surface. Finally, they reached a large storage area. There, rows of munitions, firearms, and old military equipment lay stacked and neglected, like relics of a forgotten war. The sight of such heavy weaponry in the hands of this unstable man sent a chill through Harry and Walter, but the surprises were far from over. On the wall, the captain pointed proudly to a faded photograph, a younger version of himself, posing with medals and a fierce look of authority. Harry squinted at the photo, recognition dawning slowly, but unmistakably. The man in the picture was an infamous military leader, long thought dead or missing, accused of horrifying acts during a brutal conflict years prior. Harry's stomach churned as he realized they were in the grip of someone incredibly dangerous, a fugitive hiding in plain sight on this deserted carrier. As the captain led them further, his tone grew darker, his eyes gleaming with a twisted pride. "You see, this ship was my sanctuary," he rasped. "A place where no one can find me, unless, of course, they're foolish enough to stumble upon it." Harry and Walter now understood the true danger they were in. The captain had isolated himself here to escape justice, and anyone who discovered his refuge would never be allowed to leave. Back on the plane, one stewardess had been discreetly using her cell phone to contact the mainland. With a weak signal, she finally managed to reach someone, whispering details of their situation, her voice barely audible above her trembling. The message went through, but with the captain's watchful eyes on them, they would need to survive the night and hope that help would arrive before it was too late. As the captain's tour concluded, he gave Harry and Walter one final warning: repair your plane by sunrise and leave. If you're still here when dawn breaks. His voice trailed off, the threat lingering ominously in the air. Harry and Walter, drained and horrified, hurried back to their plane, praying that the rescue team would arrive before sunrise.